Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing a book review on How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents by Julia Alvarez. So the book takes place in 1956 through 1989 over a 33-year time frame. It's about a traditional Dominican Catholic immigrant family facing America. It touches on language, sexuality, gender roles, how immigrants feel obligated to adapt to American culture and American society. They immigrate from the Dominican Republic to the US, specifically New York City in the Bronx, and they move to Long Island as well. So throughout the book, it's three parts, and the narrators are all of the main characters in different chapters, and it basically tells their point of view and how they're feeling in that moment, their experiences in America. So, diving straight into the characters of the Garcia family, it's Carla, Sandy, Yo-Yo, Fifi, and then Mommy and Papi, or Laura and Carlos. So the oldest daughter is Carla. She's your, typical older sister, firstborn child, very responsible and smart and level-headed, kind of like that glue holding the family together. She has the hardest time when they move to the US. She gets made fun of and harassed a lot for not speaking English, and I think it's kind of something that a lot of immigrants face, children immigrants at that, when in school, and just not being able to communicate. And in reality, it's not their fault, It's literally just a language barrier. You could easily move around that. So you kind of sympathize with her a little bit and grow fond of her throughout the book. She becomes a child psychologist. A lot of the things she goes through in America and just the American culture that she witnesses kind of makes her into the adult she is and develops to be. And I'll get into that later when I take a deep dive into the themes of the book, kind of like I mentioned before, just more in depth. And she's married, and yeah, that's Carla. So for Sandy, she's the second born, very beautiful, light-skinned, blue-eyed, not typically what Dominicans look like. And she gets praised for that a lot, and it's kind of what her identity is made out to be, but she struggles with that, and that's not who she wants to be portrayed as. And it makes her kind of yearn for that attention and that validation from others to hear, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. And not only that, she gets those praises for being white passing. They just moved to America and they're immigrants, and she could easily pass for a white woman. So it's they kind of uphold that, her family, especially her mom. And she goes through a lot. Luckily, she recovers and figures out her self-identity and just who she is, and she makes it out on top. So for Yo-Yo, the third daughter of the Garcias, she is a tomboy, and she pushes and embraces the feminist ideals and resents the idea of having to be more feminine because to her that doesn't define her womanhood or her femininity, and it shouldn't, and she's totally valid for that. So she kind of pushes those gender roles and identity as well, and America's standards, along with, the traditional Dominican standards as well of gender roles. A big thing that happens to her is she gets a divorce from her husband, just that lack of not being connected, and she kind of has a life crisis and is heartbroken, and, she decides to visit the Dominican Republic and realizes her home that she once only knew and grew up in, she doesn't even know. She can't speak Spanish. It's literally like she's a visitor. So she kind of struggles with that. And for the last daughter, Sophia, she's the youngest and the most rebellious. She had the most influence by Americans and from America, her growing up and only really knowing America, in her eyes, America is her home. The Dominican Republic, she barely even remembers. So she takes on a lot of America's ideologies, and especially her attitude about sex and sexual relationships. It's not traditional at all. And she's very confident and a powerful personality throughout the whole story. And she's very secure in her sexuality and knows who she wants and what she wants, and pushes those boundaries that her parents have, the normal, traditional, vanilla point of view sort of thing. She is married. They're all married. And, well, except for Yo-Yo. She's married to Odo, who she actually ran off to and, left. It was a big old thing. And she has 2 kids, a girl and a boy. And, yeah, she challenges a lot of the double standards of gender roles, sexuality, found in the Dominican culture, and I just feel like the whole Latin culture as well. So moving on to Mami or Laura, she comes from a wealthy, privileged, influential family in the Dominican Republic. She's, the daughter to the De La Toro clan, so she has a lot of status when she was in the Dominican Republic, way different than when she moved to America. So it was a very big cultural and status loss when she moved. It was kind of a shock for her, but she overcame that and, learned how to speak English, and made the adjustment and kind of made the situation better, and she values her Dominican side and her culture and her name and her family, but she also likes being American, she went to school, she creates new devices, she learned English, she was able to adjust and okay with adjusting, even allowing her daughters to be more American per se. She was okay with that. She understood that they're going to be influenced by what's around them. They're not in the Dominican Republic anymore, and so she understood that. Whereas with the last main character, Papi, Carlos, he had a very hard time adjusting to the U.S. and just American culture in general. He's the very overprotective, just traditional Dominican dad, and he's a doctor in the Bronx who practices medicine, so he's very smart and just that typical traditional man. He's has his values, is very Catholic, conservative, So when he came to the U.S. to see the change, he feared that his daughters would forget his culture, that he would forget his culture. That's his biggest thing throughout the book. So his values are just very traditional, and he's very attached to his Dominican side, which mad respect for, right? Can't complain with that. So, moving on to the themes found throughout the book. There are a lot and they're very intense, I found, but also like very relatable. This whole book, I'd say, you could tell me it was a real story based on someone's life, an immigrant's life, and I believe it. It's fiction, but it could be very well similar to someone's life story. So the themes we've seen throughout the book are just, one main one is adapting to American culture. You know, the daughters had to grow up and try to maintain two cultures, you know, their Dominican side and then their this new culture that they kind of had to conform to and adapt to because that's where they were living. And an example would be, you know, Carla and Laura learned how to speak English, and Laura would only allow English to be spoke in the house for whatever, to get that sense of speaking English down. And that resulted into the girls, you know, knowing English slang and developing this love of being an American teenager and just having the freedom and speaking whatever, and, you know, just not so traditional and what you would see normally, I guess. But with that, it kind of made them forget their Dominican side, their Dominican culture, you know. They became so consumed in America's culture that they truly became American. Like, they were Dominican, yes, and from Dominican Republic, but everything they did and wore and acted and, you know, tried to be was American. They went to American colleges, had American jobs, American husbands. Like, they weren't really Dominican, and they didn't really uphold that Dominican culture until they had realizations, you know? Like, that, one of the examples with that being Yo-Yo, you know, when she visited the Dominican Republic again and feeling like she forgot so much of her own culture, her home, like her old life, that she just realized she let America's culture and what she felt like she needed to be consume her, that she forgot once her whole life, her whole thing. So, and like also Sandy, deep diving into that, she developed an eating disorder and had mental breakdowns. She literally had to go to a psych ward and seek mental help because of the American standards of beauty, you know, so much pressure of, oh, you gotta look like this, you gotta do this, you can't be this fat, like you know, all these standards that America pushes that they think defines beauty. And it literally consumed Sandy's life to the point where she broke, she snapped. So just we see a lot of, you know, them trying to conform to America's standards, but they're not. That's not them. And they quickly realized that because Sandy recovered, you know, figured her self-identity out, figured out who she wanted to be, and got better. You know, Yolanda realized she was American, but she was also Dominican, and pushed her even more to move to the Dominican Republic, to find that culture and connect back to her roots again. You know, and with the second main theme being language and self-identity, the characters go through various trials and tribulations with language and self-identity. You know, Yolanda realizes that she's a grown woman who's Dominican, from the Dominican Republic, and she can't have a conversation at all with anybody where she's from. She is an American, like, went to American college, speaks predominantly English, and it just made her feel alienated and like limitless, basically. And, whereas with her dad and mom and even Carla, they predominantly only spoke Spanish and speak Spanish. So their accents are so much stronger that they stick out wherever they speak to whoever they speak to. Everyone knows they're immigrants or speak Spanish. So the difference shifts, whereas Carla and Papi and Mommy, they struggle in the US with speaking English and getting looked at just like Yo-Yo would in the Dominican. So language, it just is a very complex thing to look at. And, diving into Carla's story and how she was sexually harassed by a man when she was walking into school or walking home from school. The lack of English that she understood and spoke, ultimately, she couldn't explain what happened to her to the police. The police couldn't understand her or know what she was talking about, or, thought she was lying, like that sort of thing. And so language, it's a beautiful thing, but creates such a barrier when other people don't know how to speak it or don't know your language, or, look at you crazy, look like you're speaking, I don't even know, like you're not even speaking necessarily. So the whole theme on language just really pushes the characters into finding their true self-identity and also balancing out the American side and Dominican side to, kind of condense and be one. So now for the third and final theme that I found was about sexuality and gender roles. The characters truly ultimately push, the norms of sexuality and gender roles, especially being immigrants. This was way before now. This was like the 50s and 80s. So everyone's stance on that was very different. Yo-Yo, she was a tomboy. She probably stuck out like a sore thumb back then. It wasn't common. It wasn't normal. Whereas now, that's pretty normal to see, pretty normal to understand. It's more accepted. But there, she was an immigrant and also a tomboy, also divorced, a woman, a Dominican woman at that too. So it just she pushed the norms to the full level and truly set the bar high, I'd say, for not only Dominican culture, but American culture too, because like I said, that wasn't the norm. That wasn't what women were doing. And they felt they had to be more feminine, if anything. So she truly pushed the whole idea of gender roles and just sexuality in general. And also Fifi, the gender roles of her being ultimately sexualized all the time, and just her whole attitude about sex and sexual relationships. She wasn't okay with one night stands, but understood it. Was having premarital sex, where you don't do that in traditional homes, or traditional values and cultures, conservative cultures, that sort of thing. Like, you're married and you have kids, like that is the norm. So she just pushed the whole sexuality and kind of revolutionizing it for that time period, because it, like I said before, it's the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It's not even the 90s yet. So she just really pushed it and was ultimately a boss woman. For gender roles, also, you see when she had her daughter, it was kind of like she was crucified for it. She wasn't, her father, like her father especially, wasn't as accepting to when she had baby Carlos. You know, he was so happy when he had his son or his grandson. So it kind of just showed like how, especially in Latino families, how they praise the boys over the women a lot, and like it's just like that toxic masculinity sort of thing, like, oh yes, finally a boy, you know, like, woo. So that is how she, you know, kind of mentioned the gender role thing too. And ultimately, overall, the book was very good, and I'd recommend 10 out of 10 for sure. Everything that they discussed on language and self-identity especially just showed how immigrants really navigate American culture and how it ultimately changes and affects them. All right, and just to wrap up the book review, I want to mention a quote that I found and kind of related to a little bit. It was said by Sandy in part 3, chapter 3, page 248. Before I could ever get to my life, conscience was arranging it all. And so to me, it just felt like she wanted her own identity and wanted her own life to be what she wanted it to be, not what others or what society wanted it to be. You know, she was often looked at for her appearance rather than who she was, and it really took a toll on her and made her struggle even more to find her true identity. And so kind of just meant to me that like you have to do what you want and make it your own life, and it's yours to make, to decide what happens, good or bad. And you can't let, you know, other people stop you or tell you what to do, even with like those expectations, those things that, you know, people always tell you, oh, you're so great at this, you're so beautiful at this, you know, whatever. It shouldn't let that like control your life, and it shouldn't be your life. So it just kind of stuck out to me and was relatable to carry on. And yeah, that's the whole book review. I would definitely, like I said, recommend 10 out of 10 for anybody to read, especially the Latinos and Chicanos like me. That's how the Garcia girls lost their accents. Thanks.